Most people judge their health by what they see in the mirror, the number on the scale, the size of the waist, the way clothes fit in the morning. These are the measurements most people use to assess how their body is doing, and they are not without value. But doctors pay attention to something very different, something most people have never once considered measuring, something that sits quietly on the body every single day, carrying more information about long-term health and longevity than almost any other physical marker that exists: the size of the thighs. Stay with me, because what the research says about this specific measurement and why it predicts longevity in ways that surprise even most medical professionals is one of the most fascinating and most practical things you will hear today. And by the end of this, you will understand not just what it means, but exactly what you can do about it starting this week. Let us begin with a question that reframes everything. When most people think about muscle, what comes to mind? Strength, athletics, young people in gymnasiums, something relevant to performance, not to survival, not to how long a person lives or how well they function in their 7th, 8th, or 9th decade. But here's what the science actually shows. Muscle mass, particularly in the lower body, and most specifically in the large muscles of the thigh, is one of the most powerful independent predictors of long-term health outcomes in adults over 60. Independent of weight, independent of body mass index, independent of almost every other physical measurement that medicine traditionally uses to assess health risk. Think of the body like a battery. The larger and more robust that battery, the longer and more reliably it powers everything connected to it. A battery that has been slowly depleting for years, losing capacity quietly, without obvious external signs, will eventually fail to power the systems that depend on it. Not because anything broke suddenly, but because the reserve was no longer there when it was needed. Thigh muscle mass is that battery, and most people over 60 are losing it faster than they realize, without a single symptom to warn them it is happening. This is very common after 60, and understanding it is the first step toward doing something genuinely meaningful about it. Now here is where it gets interesting, and where the research produces findings that consistently surprise people. Several large-scale studies following thousands of adults over many years have found that people with greater thigh circumference, specifically thigh muscle rather than fat, have significantly lower rates of cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease, cognitive decline, and all-cause mortality compared to people with smaller thigh measurements, even after controlling for every other variable researchers could identify. One landmark Danish study found that a thigh circumference below a certain threshold was associated with a meaningfully increased risk of heart disease and premature death, independent of abdominal obesity, independent of fitness level, as measured by other markers, and independent of lifestyle factors that researchers accounted for in the analysis. Why would the size of the thigh predict heart disease and longevity? Here is the analogy that makes it clear. Imagine an old house with a large, well-maintained furnace. Even in the hardest winter, that furnace has the capacity to keep every room warm, to absorb the demand placed on it, and to recover quickly. Now imagine the same house with a furnace that has been quietly deteriorating for years, smaller, less efficient, struggling to meet the same demand. The house looks identical from the outside, but its resilience in difficult conditions is fundamentally different. The large muscles of the thigh function like that furnace for the metabolic system. They are the primary tissue in the body responsible for glucose uptake from the bloodstream after meals. They are the largest contributor to the resting metabolic rate that determines how efficiently the body manages energy. They are the primary pump that drives venous blood return from the lower body back toward the heart, reducing the cardiac workload with every step taken. When that muscle is abundant, the entire metabolic and cardiovascular system operates with greater efficiency and greater reserve. When it is depleted, every system connected to it works harder, operates with less margin, and becomes more vulnerable to the cumulative stresses of aging. That is why thigh size predicts longevity, not as a cosmetic marker, as a functional one. Now here is the warning that most people need to hear clearly, because the process that depletes this muscle is invisible until its consequences are not. After 60, the body loses muscle at a rate of approximately 1 to 2% per year without the right nutritional and physical stimulus to counteract it. This process, called sarcopenia, does not announce itself. There is no pain, no obvious weakness in the early stages, no single morning where a person wakes up and notices that something has changed. Instead, it accumulates quietly. a little more effort required to climb the same stairs, a little more difficulty rising from a low chair, a slightly longer recovery after any physical exertion, a gradual shift in the feeling of physical confidence that most people attribute entirely to age, when in reality, a significant portion of it is attributable to preventable muscle loss that was never addressed because no one explained that it needed to be. Here is the example that brings this into focus. Two people, same age, same general health profile, same diet. One walks regularly and includes some form of resistance-based movement in their weekly routine. The other is generally active, moving around the house, doing daily tasks, but never challenges the muscles of the lower body with any meaningful load. 10 years later, the difference in thigh muscle mass, metabolic function, cardiovascular reserve, and physical independence between those two people is measurable, significant, and directly traceable to this single variable. You are not alone if no one has ever framed it this way for you. Most conversations about healthy aging focus on cardiovascular fitness, on diet, on weight management. The specific and critical importance of preserving lower body muscle mass is one of the most consistently underemphasized messages in mainstream health communication for people over 60. So what actually builds and preserves thigh muscle after 60, safely, realistically, and without any equipment or gym membership? The most effective movement for this specific purpose is one we have discussed before in a different context, and its appearance here confirms just how foundational it truly is. The sit to stand. Rising from a chair without using the hands, slowly and with full control, then sitting back down with the same deliberate intention. This single movement directly loads the quadriceps, the hamstrings, the glutes, and the deep stabilizing muscles of the hip, the entire muscle complex that thigh size reflects, and that the research consistently identifies as the most longevity-relevant muscle group in the aging body. 5 repetitions in the morning to begin, building gradually to 10, then 15, over weeks rather than days. The goal is not exhaustion. The goal is consistent stimulus, the regular signal to the muscle that says it is needed, it is being used, and it should be maintained. Wall sits are another extraordinarily effective and completely accessible option. Standing with the back against a wall, sliding down until the thighs are roughly parallel to the floor, and holding that position for 20 to 30 seconds. This isometric contraction places a sustained load on the exact muscle tissue that determines thigh circumference and metabolic function, without any impact on the joints, without any equipment, and without any technique that requires instruction. Slow stair climbing, taking each step deliberately, pressing through the heel rather than the toe, pausing briefly at the top of each step before continuing, transforms an ordinary daily movement into a targeted stimulus for the lower body muscle that most people are quietly losing. Walking remains foundational, but the longevity benefit of walking for thigh muscle specifically is amplified when the walking includes inclines, when the pace is varied, and when it is paired with the resistance-based movements described above, rather than used as the sole form of lower body activity. Protein intake supports everything else, because muscle stimulus without adequate protein is like sending a construction crew to a building site with no materials. The crew arrives, the intention is there, but without the raw material of amino acids from dietary protein, the repair and rebuilding process cannot proceed effectively. Eggs, fish, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, legumes, distributed across meals throughout the day, rather than concentrated in one sitting, give the body the consistent supply of building material that muscle preservation after 60 genuinely requires. Hydration plays a quieter but real role. Muscle tissue is approximately 75% water. Even mild dehydration impairs muscle function and recovery in ways that are measurable, making consistent daily water intake not just a general health recommendation, but a specific requirement for the muscle preservation that this video is fundamentally about. So here is where everything comes together. The size of the thighs is not a vanity measurement. It is a functional marker of the metabolic and cardiovascular reserve that determines how well the body manages glucose, how efficiently the heart works, how resilient the system is under the physical and biological stresses of aging, and ultimately, how long and how well a person lives. The muscle that determines that marker is being lost quietly, progressively, and without symptoms in most people over 60. And it can be preserved, not completely stopped in its natural progression, but meaningfully slowed, maintained, and in many cases partially rebuilt through the right combination of consistent movement, adequate protein, proper hydration, and the sleep that allows every other intervention to actually work. 5 sit-to-stands every morning. A wall sit held for 20 seconds. A daily walk that includes some variation and some incline. Protein at every meal. Water throughout the day before thirst arrives. These are not dramatic interventions. They are quiet, consistent daily acts of investment in the biological reserve that determines whether the decades ahead are lived with strength and independence or with increasing vulnerability and limitation. Your body is still responding, still adapting, still capable of rebuilding something meaningful from where you are right now. Have you noticed changes in your leg strength or physical confidence over the past few years? Does this happen in your daily life? Share your experience in the comments below, because what you share here matters, and someone in this community may find exactly the encouragement they needed in your words today.